Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Neil, for joining me again for another edition of TD Wealth.
Yeah, here we are. Getting closer to spring.
That's right. That's always a good thing, right?
Closer, right? It doesn't feel like it is.
No, but it's going to come eventually, right?
Yeah, I hope so. Right? I want the golf course to open.
That's right. So speaking of this time of year, as winter ends, RSP season is over, but there's still lots of questions. So what are some information you give, some tips, and why should people consider RSPs as part of their financial plan?
Yeah, like I'll just speak from my office's personal experience here this last year. It was kind of a mad dash at the end with a couple of clients to try to put it together for RSPs. And typically, this is an ongoing conversation you should be having with your financial advisor throughout the entire year. And the number one reason of why is obviously it's the basis to your retirement plan for the most part. For most Canadians, RSPs are extremely important. And just because it's not in the news and just because it's maybe not on some of the marketing materials at some of the banks doesn't mean you shouldn't be thinking about this in all months of the year, or at least having a discussion. So the number one thing is that the ideal situation is there's a couple different ways of how much you should be putting into RSPs or how much you should be thinking about it. Think about it in reverse, is how much do you need one day to retire with? So there's a couple different ways to calculate it. One of the ways is you should be using maybe a 4% withdrawal rate. So for example, if you want 40 grand a year one day in retirement income, I guess 4%, you need to, on $1 million is about 40 grand a year. That's definitely one of the ways to be able to calculate of how much you're going to need in RSPs one day, to have a discussion with your financial planner to try to figure out kind of how much you're going to need in these RSPs. Another big thing is to think about actually going back in time and using some catch-up room around your RSPs. A lot of people don't realize sometimes that they have previous room in their RSP plans that they can catch up on, and people forget about that. So again, having a discussion after you get your taxes done in April, look at your tax assessment and try to figure out how much RSPs you can put in for the next year or the next few years. Get a plan in place is super, super important.
Okay. Is there another key thing about RSPs that you want to mention?
Well, around spousal RSPs is another big one. And that's another big thing that people, especially around income splitting, when they get into retirement. Again, speaking back to that, say $40,000 a year of what you need for retirement, it's something that you can spread out with over two spouses or over your spouse. So to make sure that you utilize a spousal RSP is just as important, especially before age 65 if you're going to retire before then, to make sure that you have some in your spouse's plan and in your plan to be able to budget back and forth. Again, a great financial planner will be able to make sure that they can visualize this and make sure you are in the right spots for retirement.
Okay. And I think you've probably got one more. What's one more thing for RSP?
Well, the only other thing I would say is making sure that you, especially now with interest rates being so high, make sure you have your portfolio in your RSP account split up in the right ways. So for example, you may want to put those GICs now or those high interest bearing investments inside your RSP because you pay no tax on them now as they're growing, especially with interest rates at 5 and 6%. Man, oh man, this is a great time now to have those guaranteed investments inside your RSP accounts.
Okay. And one last one for you. Last week there were some bank failures that we heard about in the news. What was that impact on markets and Canadian stocks, and what sort of guidance can you give to people?
Well, yeah, talk about a current topic. Man, oh man, these bank failures were all the rage there in the last week or so here. It's been mostly regional banks in the U.S. that has been the number one topic, and it's a very fluid situation right now where it's kind of top of mind and it's changing every minute or every day, at least for the most part. In Canada here, it did have a little bit of an impact on the banking sector. Last week we were down about 5%, and overall for the year, most bank stocks off somewhere from 5 to 10%-ish, to give you an idea. Some of the Canadian banks that do have a little bit of exposure in the U.S. or have more regional exposure in the U.S. were a little bit more sensitive to this. But interestingly enough, the U.S. stock market in general last week was actually positive. And for the year, it is still positive, even though you hear the front page news, which is all about the different the banking issues right now in the last few weeks.
Well, thank you very much again for joining us. That's a lot for people to think about going forward, immediately and well into the future. Thanks very much, Neil.
Great. Thanks, everybody.